this is a serious sport. I know how quickly things can happen in this sport.
Yeah.
I owe it to myself to let me at least talk to the doctors and make them aware that I feel like something's off. And so I went and I talked to the medical staff on hand. They hooked me up to some diagnostic machines to check my heart rate and everything. And lo and behold, I was in AFib, atrial fibrillation. My heart was skipping beats.
Welcome to the Shaw Strength Podcast. I hope you guys are doing well. Today, I am joined by Mr. Gabe Pena. And if you haven't heard his name, you will be hearing more of his name. He is a guy that's up and coming, definitely making a name for himself in the strongman world. How you doing, buddy?
I'm fantastic. Part of my soul gets energized just being up here in the mountains. So life is good right now.
We have talked about that a little bit. Actually, just a couple minutes ago, you put up your drone in my driveway, which was unique, man. You're like, hey, this is a beautiful day. It's a clear blue sky, and we've got some snow on the ground here in Colorado, and I need to get a shot of this. So I just stood back and I said, okay, go ahead, man. And you put the drone up and got some really, really cool shots.
A lot of what I enjoy in life is getting viewpoints from a higher vantage point, and I got myself a drone, something I've always wanted to get late last year. And I come from a part of the country that's just flat and two-dimensional. So I'm here in the mountains. I love being here. I see that sunrise hitting that continental divide. Let me put up the drone and capture some of these memories to take home.
Yeah, I got to see a viewpoint from the house here that I have not got to see. So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course, man. We'll definitely put it up again.
It was awesome. So today we get to learn more about Gabe, and I'm really excited about this because I did a little bit of research. Of course, your background and some of that stuff, which I'd love to dive into and just learn more about you and really try to figure out what makes you tick, and I feel like you're a guy that from the message that you put out there is very positive, very grateful, and just a really good mindset from what I have seen. So I think this is going to be really interesting, man.
Well, it's fun. I'm here to dive right in. There's definitely been a lot of self-improvement and philosophy gained over the years. So I'm an open book, Brian. Let's get at it.
I love it, man. So growing up, I know that you were the oldest of 6 siblings. So with about a 2-year gap, is that right?
Correct. A lot of our family friends and just friends in general like to refer to our family as the Brady Bunch. It's mom and dad and 3 boys, 3 girls, and I'm the oldest of the 6.
That's crazy. So what was that experience like growing up? Being the oldest, I would imagine you had to set the example and lead in a way, especially after, let's just say you were 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever, with some of your younger siblings, you've already been through it. And I would imagine you remember that very vividly, like being in that role where I would imagine your parents are like, hey, Gabe, can you help out? Can you do this? And what was that like?
Well, first and foremost, there was never a dull moment. There was always something happening, always a kid crying. It was, everyone always had each other's backs too growing up. But there's a 2-year difference between myself and all my other siblings. So the next oldest, my brother Luke, he's 2 years younger than me. I don't remember too much of when he was a baby. But then my sister Isabel and Juliet, Anna and Esteban, the other 4 after that, I remember everything from changing their diapers to helping out with all the baby stuff, feeding them, all the things. It was nice having an active role as an older brother in their upbringing too. But it definitely gives that sense of responsibility and like you're the leader of the pack. And it was kind of a lot more responsibility than a young 5, 6, 7-year-old Gabe would have liked at the time. But I look back on those memories, and especially now as a soon-to-be father in a couple of weeks, those things, those lessons, all those experiences really have accumulated into something that I'm going to be using every day from here on out. No,
that's fascinating, man. We'll get more into the soon-to-be dad talk
exciting stuff
a little bit later on here. But, growing up, you and your brother were 2 years apart. Was there a lot of competitiveness between you and any of your other siblings, or how did that go? And when did you first start getting into sports or different activities, or what were you into as a kid?
Well, as a kid being into, I loved going out and exploring. Our childhood at home was very close to a canal system back there in Edinburgh, Texas. And
okay.
I have very fond memories of summer days where myself, my brother, maybe my sisters, but, our friends who lived in the neighborhood, we just go out to the canals, walk around, look for turtles, lizards, snakes, just use the entire day out there being outside and loving it. That's
awesome.
what I was really into. And of course, later on, around like 4th, 5th grade, the Nintendo 64 and Game Boys came into play. And, we started loving that too. But I definitely always had this sense of wanting to get outside and explore and feel the sun beating down my face. I loved animals, lizards and snakes, reptiles especially. That was really my jam. Cool.
So you could either ride your bike or walk to that canal system and explore, really.
Yeah. And it was a different time, right? It was late 90s, early 2000s. So we were able to go ride our bikes, and our parents didn't have a care in the world of worrying about our safety. But I remember either just walking on the canals, traveling for miles, or getting on the bikes and, driving or cycling to the nearby next city.
Yeah.
Having those adventures as a kid, like it was very reminiscent of like watching the Goonies or any of these old like 90s adventure movies. And that's what it felt like. And it was invaluable and priceless childhood memories that I will cherish forever.
I remember a lot of that growing up too. It's, my parents would say, okay, it's time for you to go ride your bike, go do something. And so you'd get together with your friends and just go ride bikes and, get into something, anything, right? Whether it was like, hey, we're going to build a jump to jump our bikes off of. Is it a good idea? I don't know, and there were some injuries that occurred along the way, but you learned and you had a good time and you used your imagination and went out and just got dirty. And I think that there's a lot of learning that can be done in that as a kid, especially.
You brought up the making jumps for your bikes and stuff. I have some very precious childhood memories of, the area of Texas that I live in is very subtropical. We get hurricanes in the summers in the late season. I remember we had Hurricane Dolly, I believe, came through in the late 90s, maybe the early 2000s, but it had just ravaged the area in terms of, fallen limbs and standing water everywhere. And so what did we do? School was canceled. We got on our bikes and we started driving through all these puddles, building jumps and crashing into like standing water. I think at some point we even got skimboards attached to tarp to ropes and was letting the wind pull us down the road right in front of our house. But little things like that, not being stuck behind a screen and going out and just having fun. I look back on that and I think of the generations nowadays, and I hope they find ways to still experience that hands-on, immersed in nature sort of just have fun, get dirty. Like you said.
I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, I think there's certain aspects of technology that are great, but as a kid, I think that using your imagination and getting your hands dirty and going out and doing those types of things, it's such a valuable experience. And I think that it is very important for kids to connect with that too. And that's one of the big things that Carrie and I try to do with the boys is, have them just go outside and play and just, play with dirt and sticks and, whatever it might be, just go do that and use your imagination. And it's really fun to sit back and watch children have that imagination and explore and do those things. So with that type of childhood, you're exploring, you're getting out. When did you find yourself gravitating toward anything competitive?
You had touched on it before we got into the exploration phase of my childhood. My younger brother, Luke, he's just barely under 2 years below me. And that being said, we were each other's best friends and our biggest support systems growing up. He was the next oldest sibling, and we got to experience a lot of things together. But as the firstborn, I was learning how to navigate the world on my own. And then, of course, learning from how my younger siblings would navigate the world too. I might have had some competitive desires, but I don't think I really followed them through because I didn't have anyone really to push me other than myself or my younger siblings. I actually credit my brother Luke to getting me into working out. I had liked the idea of moving weight around, like in the middle school weight room at the time, but it was still very intimidating. But my brother, he and his friends were active. They would play football on the weekends, and he had gotten a membership at one of the local commercial gyms, and he had invited me to come along with him at one point, and I saw him start to transform. saw him start to build muscle. I'm like, my little brother's growing.
Yeah.
Let me get in on this too. Like he's doing some awesome things. And he actually, I really credit my brother Luke to getting me involved into working out. And he might hear that and be like, Gabe, how could you say that? Like, look at you compared to me nowadays. But he really, in the beginning, he was the one that got me to the gym, doing the squats, the bench presses, all the basic fundamentals of working out. And that was, I guess, the start of it all.
That's it. And so how old were you? I mean, that's fascinating that your younger brother, in a way, and I mean, it's cool. That's really cool. I mean, to hear that and, for him to push you into it and for you to see him change and say, hey, kind of what's going on here. I want to kind of experience that as well. I mean, how old were you?
I would say this was around between like 7th, 8th, maybe 9th grade. So we're talking like 12 to 14, right around that
Perfect age.
time. Yeah. And that was the start of working out and weight training. But I also remember when I was in high school, when we were both in high school, I was a senior at the time and my brother was a sophomore. He joined the swim team. And both of us had grown up listening to our father talk about his experiences in high school on the swim team and how it was just one of the greatest things he ever did. And being the oldest, especially, navigating high school as the firstborn, figuring out all these experiences in life in that new realm, it wasn't necessarily my first reaction to join the swim team. But when Luke joined the swim team and he started doing well, it's like that same thing again. Little bro's doing it. Yeah. Let me get involved. And once he got in, I got into swimming too. And we were both competitive swimmers for his sophomore year and my senior year. I finished off high school being on the swim team with my younger brother, and that was just an incredible experience to have that level of intimate support in this new territory and discovering the competitive aspect of my life and my ambitions. And swimming is what I would say really triggered it. Getting on that platform, swimming the relays or doing the individual strokes. I love doing the butterfly. That was my favorite. But I also remember stepping onto that platform, waiting for that whistle, hearing it go and just giving it my all. It was me and my performance, and that was it.
Just in that zone.
And that triggered it. That was the start of my competitive side to life.
So you didn't know swimming at all or anything really before your senior year? Or did you do any other sports before that?
No sports. I was in band up until that point.
Really?
So marching band and symphonic band at the same time. But that
what instrument?
The French horn.
Really?
The French horn. I remember watching a lot of movies, especially like the Star Wars movies. You would hear that French horn come out and just have this epic and melodic solo. And I'm like, that's the instrument I want to play.
That's
and I
cool.
did.
Yeah.
And I tend to like more of the symphony setting. I wasn't a big fan of marching band. That was a little too, it was not the realm that I liked. I liked when the orchestra came together and you produced this massive, elaborate piece of majestic music. And that was what I liked. But that's all I did.
When did you pick that up? When did you start playing?
In 6th grade, so right at the start of middle school.
Okay.
I played French horn all through middle school and through the first 3 years of high school.
So let me ask you this, with that, or different things that you got into, when you started playing the French horn, was it something where you were almost competitive with yourself with that instrument? I mean, did you practice like religiously? Was it something that you could feel you just gravitated towards? You're like, hey, I heard that. I want to do this. I'm going to practice and practice and practice to make myself good at it. Or where was your mind at? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Hearing you say those things now, I'm starting to realize that maybe those competitive fires were starting to burn then too, because I would take, my instrument home and I would sit on the front porch playing like just not necessarily the best music, but just trying to figure it out and practice for all the neighborhood to hear. But I wanted to get better. I loved the idea of being first chair. I didn't want to be second chair. I didn't want to be third chair. I wanted to be the guy who got the solos. I wanted to be the guy that everyone looked to lead them through these pieces of music. And so I would practice my butt off. And I was first chair most of the time. And that was a trophy, a badge of honor that I was very proud to hold.
So you could work by yourself solo and get better.
Yeah. Now, that being said, I also did seek out, like help from the assistant band directors or things like that.
But I mean, that's part of getting better. And it's not maybe doing it all by yourself, but when the rubber meets the road in something like that, if you don't put the practice in to get better, even with all the coaching in the world, you're not going to get to that level and earn that spot that you wanted to earn.
Yeah. And there was definitely a lot of practice sessions on my own, whether it was outside on the front porch or in my room with the sheet of music in front of me. It was something I was trying to self-improve on from day to day.
That's so maybe there was a little bit of fire there. Is what
I think so too, but it's weird to think about it because it wasn't necessarily a sports setting, but it was a competitive setting, and that's a very true observation that you kind of helped me realize right now. And that was
one of the things. I mean, for me, I got into basketball early on, and one of the things that I loved about basketball was all I needed was a ball, and maybe not even a hoop, but sometimes just a ball and a hoop, and I could go by myself. I didn't have to rely on anybody else. And I could just go practice by myself and get better. And I liked being in that zone where I felt like I was in control of getting better. And I could dictate how hard I would work to get better at that. And I could kind of live in that zone. And only knew if I put the shots up or I worked on different aspects of my game to get better. And it's very much the same thing. I mean, it's interesting that you transfer that to music, and then later on, being your senior year of high school, then came swimming, and then it was, hey, I'm getting in this lane and somebody's next to me and I'm going to go, and there's going to be a start command and a whistle or whatever, and I'm going to go, and now I'm going to try to beat you at that. But you're still competing to get first chair, like you said. So it's different. It's fascinating. That's fascinating to me.
It's quite profound to look back at all these things chronologically and think of the observation of how self-progress and improvement, and watching your efforts constructively build and yield something great over time.
Yeah.
That's one of the most powerful motivating forces that the individual can experience. And whether it was from going for first chair in band or trying to get the next position up or a better time in swimming, to now those paved the way to my performance increases throughout the sport that I am so actively involved in now. I mean, it's really weird to trace those all the way back to as early as 6th grade, but
yeah,
it's true.
Yeah. So when your brother kind of introduced you or started you with training, is that something when you first started training, did you fall in love with it immediately, or did you kind of dabble in it a little bit? And how did that look after, say, like you said, 7th grade, around that time, 7th, 8th grade into high school? I mean, was it something that you continued to do, or it was kind of on and off, or how did that look?
It was on and off. And it was very basic training,
Yeah.
When we're in middle school, early high school, it's like chest and biceps, right? Like, let's get the arms pumped up.
What you can see in the mirror is
exactly. The squat days aren't necessarily nearly as close to as important as they are now. But
that is a very true story for a lot of people.
Yeah,
for sure.
It was like, oh, my triceps are starting to look better, or the sleeves are starting to fit tighter, and those little realizations, like, it's pretty powerful. Or the bench press goes up 5 pounds one week, or man, I remember the day I could finally do a plate.
Yes.
I remember the first time picking up a barbell and just be like, this is how heavy they are. This 45-pound bar is hefty.
Yes.
But that first time being able to do a 45-pound plate on each side, that was a monumental day. And that was probably somewhere around the early part of my swimming year in high school, so senior year. I think I topped out at 155 on that year on bench. And that was a big deal for me because I hadn't really done any free weight bench. It had been a lot of machines up until that point.
Yeah, well, working up to a plate is a big deal at the start, especially getting a 25 for a lot of people, and then working up to a 45, and starting to get the movement pattern down and to get stronger. I mean, it's something that it's fun to think back, to when you're starting and those accomplishments, and then comes 2 plates, and then comes 3 plates, and all these milestones along the way that, especially at that age, are a big deal, and the confidence that comes from that. You start to feel so much better about yourself. And like you said, the shirt aspect. So one of the things that I said early on, especially as I was trying to gain more weight, is I said shirts are like fish tanks, right? So if you put on, I would always force myself to wear a little bit bigger shirt and go in the opposite direction, because a lot of guys will go for the schmedium look, right? Oh, look at me, I'm filling out the shirt, my arms are so tight. I would always try to buy one size bigger, because I said, well, if it's like a fish tank, I'm going to have to grow to fill it up, right? So I'm going to force myself to do that. And then I know that I'm getting bigger by filling out this bigger shirt. So it was a mental game that I played, but it's funny to hear you say that, like the shirt's fitting tighter. And that's such a big thing to guys out there, I think, when you're younger and you get into training, because it's a representation of the work paying off, right? Like you start to feel better about yourself, and you're like, oh, I'm seeing more size, and I'm filling out my shirt good. It's just something good about putting on a shirt and it's a little bit tighter.
Well, that's exactly it too. While building yourself down this path, like you said, you start to build up confidence as well. And I remember very early on, if I was in the weight room with my brother, I wanted to be there with him. I wouldn't want to go to the school weight room and go lift with all the football players. My confidence just wasn't there. Like, these guys are putting 2 plates, 3 plates up on bench press. What am I going to look like compared to them? But after I started getting better, after I started pushing and swimming, and my performance was improving from week to week, from meet to meet, I remember finishing off that swimming season, and I would just, as soon as I was done with my last class of the day, I'd change, go straight to the high school weight room, and I'd just work out there with the football players, even though I was a swimmer.
Yeah.
Because I had gained that confidence, because I knew my work was paying off, and I was growing both in body and mind. And that's quite an invaluable thing for a young individual to realize. But I completely attribute that to the constructive process, and it's an injustice for people not to feel that to some degree. And you have to have these endeavors that yield that, I feel like.
So with the training, what point would you say it set in where you were really, I'm going to use the word addicted, but it had to be part of your life? At what point in that process, from when you started to being a senior, where you're like, all right, I'm done with practice, I'm going to go train and go in the weight room, and I have this confidence now. Where would you say at that point, what point was it where you were addicted to it?
Now, it might not have been addicted to weight training, but the idea of training in general really started as soon as I started swimming.
Okay.
I think to that first swim practice that I went to, and just how much I felt like my butt got kicked just from the warm-ups, and seeing the other athletes and how well they were able to just cruise through everything. And it just seemed like it was as easy to them as walking. And I wanted that. And so I knew the only way to do that was to be continuously practicing and getting better. Whether it was walking, running, swimming in the pool for laps, or doing weights in the weight room, I knew that in order to achieve those goals, I had to put in the effort. So at that point, I knew that training had to have some sort of keystone focus, in my week, whether it's 3 times a week, 2 times a week, 4 times a week, 5 times a week. I needed to know that I was putting the efforts in to get better. So that aspect of self-improvement and that realization started with swimming. But I wouldn't say weights took their core center point in my focus until a couple years later on after high school.
Interesting. That's really interesting. So you're 18 years old. How, just for a size comparison, where were you at in high school size wise? And, I'm assuming you got in a lot better shape with swimming and with that physical activity and that type of stuff. I mean, where were you at size wise?
Prior to swimming, the early years of high school, I was a little bit shorter, probably around like 5'6" to 5'8". And I was chubby at the time too. I was at 233 at that point.
Okay.
But junior year, I stretched out, and senior year, I was the same height I am now, 6'2". And I had graduated senior year of high school, 6'2" at 165 pounds.
Wow.
So I was a string bean, but a swimmer's build.
Yeah.
And very lean, very, very lean, but just as tall as I am now.
Were you sad at all that you didn't start swimming until your senior year?
A little bit, but all those voices of regret, there was never a point where they cast a shadow on the voices of appreciation. And it's weird to think of a young individual being able to rationalize these things, but all the times where I felt regretful of not having done it sooner, I realized that I did it now, and I'm enjoying it so much now, with my brother, just from the enjoyment, the experience that I'm getting, that's invaluable on its own. So it's like, I can complain and be regretful as much as I want for all the time that has been passed.
Yeah.
Or I can be grateful for what I'm doing now and think of what comes next down the road. And those are very profound lessons for a young individual to have, but somehow, some way I was able to think that way. And
that's
I'm
interesting.
very, very glad I was able to.
Yeah. There's a lot of power in that, being in the moment and being grateful for what's going on and what's happening and what the future holds.
Right.
And always looking forward to not so much looking in the rearview mirror, so to speak, at what time had passed or has passed in your life. And I think there's so much power in that, just in life in general, but especially at that age, like you said, that's crazy that's the way you were thinking.
I attribute a lot of that also to those lessons to thinking of my freshman, my sophomore year of high school, being shorter, being chubby, and having the self-esteem issues that go along with that during the crazy times of puberty.
100%.
And feeling that level of confidence spark and that level of body image confidence too that came along with swimming.
Yeah.
And just the overall improvement in quality of life. I was happy. I was chasing things positively. Knowing how I felt then compared to how I felt when I was shorter and chubbier in sophomore year.
Yeah.
Those realizations were what really solidified my positive outlook on, like, I'm here and I'm doing this now.
Yeah.
Now is what it's all about, and the future of what comes next, because I'm having a really good time.
Yeah. It's fascinating to me with what you're talking about there, being shorter and, like you said, a little bit chubbier, that type of stuff. The confidence level difference had to be tremendous from, walking out of high school as a senior, feeling the way that you felt. So where did you take it from there? right? So you've got this new level of confidence. You're walking out of high school. I mean, did you try to continue it all with the swimming, or that was done, that chapter was closed and you were moving on?
The competitive swimming I had stopped, but that summer of high school, I had continued to swim as a lifeguard, and I worked all that summer as a lifeguard at the city pool. So I kept myself in good swimming shape. And it was a daily part of my routine for warm-ups for pool time. I would swim, a quarter mile, half mile. I was still in good swimming shape, but I wasn't doing it competitively.
Yeah.
That being said, that summer of high school going into freshman year of college, that was kind of like that weird time in people's lives where, I was a goody two-shoes nerd throughout high school. But when you graduate high school and all of your friends are 18 and they're getting their freedoms, that's where, like the high school partying phase kind of takes over. So that summer, I was working as a lifeguard, but I was also going out to parties with friends, and that necessary experiences to a certain degree, but that also puts like the competitive athletic endeavors on the back burner because you're just having so much fun enjoying these new things.
Yeah.
And going into freshman year of college, it was still like, you're in college now. Parties are happening every week, it seems like. So the athletic side kind of took a back burner, and I wasn't doing anything competitively. I was, going to school, keeping up my grades, but when school was done, I would go and, party with my cousin at his apartment or stuff like that. And
so at that point, what was your goal? What was your goal to be in life? I mean, what were you studying? What were your ambitions?
I had started college on a track for pre-med, so a major in biology and minor in chemistry. I've loved the sciences my entire life, from the start of my early childhood up until I'm a major nerd to this day. But I wanted to, no matter how much I wanted to let loose on the weekends, my grades always were in the center point of my focus. I wanted that 4.0 GPA. I wanted to excel in all of my classes. So I put the time in on the books.
So that was the focus.
That was the focus, academics at the time. And I would say probably around that time too, I had gotten into my first long-term relationship that lasted about 2.5 years.
Okay.
And that was the major time consumer. Well, that took up the majority of my attention was, you have academics and then you have a relationship, and everything else kind of didn't seem as important in comparison to that younger version of myself.
Interesting. So you're going down that road. Were you training still, or was that kind of like, hey, that had taken a backseat too?
It had taken a backseat as well. I was doing things here and there, maybe running like a half mile, full mile here and there, but not really doing any weights, not doing anything majorly athletic.
So you go through freshman, sophomore year of college, and then you said about that like 2 years after high school is where that came in. How did that come back in?
I actually attribute that switch to the breakup of that long-term relationship. And it was, there was certain, it was a breakup that I had to be the one to break up with this person because let me ask this, and you don't have to go into too much detail, but was it something that it wasn't a great situation? Was it a drain on your time in a negative way, that relationship? Because I know a lot of early relationships can be that, and sometimes it's hard to say, hey, look, I've got to get out of this because it's not great for me. I mean, was it that type of situation, or what made you need to get out? It was a situation where we were both very young, both in college, but this person had cheated on me, and I was just like, that's it.
Sure.
That's it. We're done.
The trust is broken.
The trust is broken. We're moving on. But then with that immediate severance of this thing that was taking up all my attention and focus, I needed to fill that void, and I needed to feel better about myself, because it's a really crappy feeling when someone you love, goes and completely just dishonors that trust.
100%.
And it sucks. So I needed to build that confidence back up. And I think to those early days training with my brother and realizing the confidence enhancements through the training, the self-improvement, the positive, constructive outlook that yielded on life. And I got back in the weight room.
There you go.
I got back in the weight room, and I think back to early days, even in my childhood, of watching World's Strongest Man on TV with my father and my grandfather on Thanksgiving mornings. And, back then, and as a child, I'm watching superheroes. I'm watching real life superheroes. How could I ever be like them? But there was that little spark that was like, if I could, that would be really awesome. And so at this point, I wanted to get bigger. I wanted to feel better about myself. I know there were times throughout that relationship where I could tell that the person I was with when other guys, you know, who were maybe bigger or more confident or whatever would come in or would be around them, I would notice certain behaviors. I was like, I don't want to feel like the smaller guy. I don't want to feel like the weaker guy. I want to feel like the confident, strong guy. And so in that weight room, I started to find that, you know, with a big frame that I had, I was putting on weight. I was putting on muscle. I was making gains from week to week. And I realized that, hey, there's something here.
Yeah.
There's something here that I didn't realize before because I wasn't really trying for strength, but I was using a very bodybuilding style type training approach, and it was yielding tremendous results. So the confidence was going up, the body weight, the musculature was going up, and that was the moment where I started really changing. I would say that was around 2000, maybe 2011, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was about 20, 21 years old at the time.
So you mentioned watching World's Strongest Man or seeing it. Was that the first point that you had seen it, or was that something you had seen when you were even younger that was just kind of like, oh, I like watching this? I mean, did you gravitate toward it before that point, or was like, hey, now I'm training, now I'm really starting to pay attention to this? I mean, when did that seed kind of, you know, get planted?
The initial seed got planted just from family traditions. You know, it was as simple as on Thanksgiving mornings, they'd watch the Macy's Day Parade, and then they'd flip it to the old reruns of classic World's Strongest Man.
That's awesome.
It's something about being there with Dad and Grandpa and, you know, having the full bellies in a feast style setting. And it was just good times.
Did your dad train at all?
No, he didn't train.
You said he did swimming, right?
He did swimming, but he was always he loved being outside in nature also. And that's where I get a lot of my appreciation for
some of that experience came from your dad and that type of thing. I mean, it's interesting because it wasn't as, I don't want to say as accepted, but it wasn't as normal, you know, for, I would say, you know, our parents. My parents are a little bit older than yours, I'm sure, but, you know, it just wasn't as readily available, right? It wasn't quite as accepted. So, you know, to be in some sport for sure was kind of normal, but it's just different. And it's interesting to hear that even for, you know, your family who wasn't necessarily like super into training, they would turn on, you know, World's Strongest Man. It's and we can talk more about that. It's got a certain appeal to people who even don't do it, you know, or maybe, I mean, you started to have that seed of aspirations of, wow, that would be cool. Look at these guys, they're kind of larger than life. And that's fascinating to me to hear that.
Well, that's the essence of Strongman, right? The spectacle for everyone for the average Joe to see and be like, that is amazing. I want to watch more of this. And you know, that's what sucked in the little 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old Gabe and Dad and Grandpa at the same time. None of us did anything remotely close to Strongman, but we saw this spectacular display of strength in these larger than life athletes. I mean, you just couldn't turn away.
Yeah. So who I'm going to ask you this, who are maybe the first competitor or first competitors that you remember?
Lou Ferrigno,
okay,
in the very early stages of Strongman, Kaz and John Paul,
okay,
Sigmarsson also, and then is it Magnus Samuelsson? I think also he had the famous like handlebar mustache, correct?
Yes,
yeah. And I remember that mustache very early on. But then of course lots of other athletes who I just wasn't necessarily aware of their names at the time, but I remember those guys for
sure. So some of the very, very early names.
Oh yeah, I mean they were classic reruns playing on Thanksgiving morning.
That's awesome, man. Yeah. That's so cool. So you're now about halfway through college, and you're getting bigger, you're getting stronger, you're gaining all that confidence, and you know, starting to have the seed of, wow, I feel like I've got a knack for this. This is something I'm really gravitating towards. So at that point, where did you take it from them? Did you keep with more of the, you called it bodybuilding training, which is very normal to start with, you know, by the way, but did you keep rolling with that? And you're just like, hey, I'm going in here, I feel good. You know, I'm going to try to maybe start eating a little bit more, training heavier, building myself up and just gaining this confidence. Where did that shift come at that point in time?
Yeah. So I was always my own coach. And as someone who had a big background in science and a deep understanding of anatomy and physiology and physics, I felt very well equipped to be able to just research different training styles and apply them myself without the need of a direct coach. And I remember looking towards old programs by Dorian Yates, you know, the Blood, Sweat, and Glory, or Blood, Sweat, and Guts. I can't remember what it was called.
Yeah.
But in following his training methods of a lot of pushing to failure stuff. But I also had a very deep understanding of, you know, how important nutrition was. So from that early point of starting and wanting to bulk up, I knew that I didn't need to be eating to maintain my current self. I needed to be eating with the intentions of supporting the goal weight or how big I want to be. That's what I need to be eating like if I wanted to be putting on that extra mass. And I kept getting bigger. And I remember at some point I was around 230 pounds, where I had met my wife. She had come to the local gym that I was working at the time. I was working the front desk staff and helping to run and maintain the gym. And she had seen me at some point. It's quite, I'm going to bring this up and she's going to laugh that I brought it up.
No, it's great. Yeah.
I was cleaning the machines and they had us dressed in like a black polo shirt tucked into some khaki pants.
There you go. Yeah.
And I was cleaning the machine and she told me that she was looking up and my back was facing her and she just like, wow, who is that with such a great ass?
Oh, that's awesome.
And it was the butt that sucked her in, man. But then she said, I saw you turn around. I was like, oh my gosh, that's Gabe. And it was a very different Gabe that she had remembered from when we were friends early on. And
that's amazing.
And,
that's
amazing. She was a high school crush of mine. So I had met her. She was my brother's age, part of my brother's circle of friends, 2 years younger than me. So I knew her in middle school. I had a crush on her while she was in middle school and I was in early high school. But we had stayed friends through the time, and I joked that I was kept in the friend zone.
The friend zone, that's a spot that a lot of guys end up in and they can't get out of.
Quite a stubborn spot for sure. But yes. We were very good friends. We stayed up late on the phones at night, and it was really cool to have. She was one of the first females I had an intimate connection with, through someone I could talk to and just be myself open with. But we were friends throughout. We kept our friendship throughout middle school and high school. But we're talking now. Fast forward to 2011.
Yeah.
So we had both grown up a little bit, and I had obviously changed a lot. I put on a lot of mass.
Totally.
I got that booty that sucked her in.
There you go, man.
And I was doing deadlifts and squats at the time, and
it was
do your deadlifts and squats.
Deadlifts and squats draw women in. That's true, man.
Tried and proven, and they pull men out of the friend zone.
That's maybe some kind of quote you can roll with, man. Deadlifts get you out of the friend zone. There you go.
The king of all lifts for many reasons, right? But I hadn't gained all the mass through this bodybuilding time. But I had built this impressive muscular physique.
Yeah,
and
your confidence has to be, I would imagine, just like you're so much more confident. You're approaching life in that way, and I say this a lot to people. It translates over to real life in so many different ways when you start training and when you start feeling that way. And that's why I've always said, I feel like everybody should train in some capacity because it has so much carryover to normal life. Even if your aspirations are not to go lift the heaviest weight or do strongman or powerlifting or anything really, but just to add training to your day, it's such a positive thing that so many people can benefit from.
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of that newfound confidence and that the positive body image issues or the positive body image reflection, it definitely helped me navigate the initial early stages of that flirting back and forth with her again, now that we had grown up. And
so you see her, she sees you in the gym. And she says something to you at this point, or
like little small talk, but I could obviously pick up on that there was
a little smile.
There was some undertones there, and then, like maybe that message came through later on that day on Facebook, like, oh, look who messaged me. I haven't talked to her in a while, and then so
she was the one that sent the first message at that point.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome.
It's kind of like this. It's great. It was great to see you, sort of thing. Like it had been a while, and the conversation just kept going on from there. But I had a lot more confidence, and I was able to navigate in a way to where she was someone who I was very interested in much earlier, many years before. And that interest didn't die, and we had both only gotten older, and we had both of us gotten more attractive. I mean, since that, we're in a place in life where we're not kids anymore. We're young adults, and that was the start of it all. And we started dating in 2012, and I was still.
So you're around 21 at this point?
21, 22 at this point. And, we started dating in 2012. I was still training at the gym. I met her at the gym. So she was obviously training at the time too. And it was very easy for us in our early stages of dating to go get partner workouts at the gym. She very quickly became my favorite training partner.
That's awesome.
And it's a weird thing to see me benching 3+ plates and have little 130-pound her, being my spotter. But she was my favorite training partner. We knew how each other... we knew each other's vibes. We knew how to read each other and how to support each other. And It was great. And at one point, she was friends with someone who was involved with one of the local rugby teams that practiced at the university. And she went out to some practices and wanted to, help get started a women's rugby team. And it was one of those things, rugby practices would last 3 hours. And so I'm like, well, Bianca's spending 3 hours of her day here. I want to be with her. Rugby sounds fun. It sounds competitive. I've seen it on TV. It looks like something I want to do. So I went out and I started playing rugby with the local team. And it was that same sort of realization when on my first practice at swimming. Yeah. When we do the warm up and my butt just gets totally kicked and we haven't even started practice yet. I'm like, I want to get better. I see these other athletes and they're a high level of performance. I want to be like them.
Yeah.
So I kept going to rugby practices. I kept improving there, playing at the games, competing in the circuit. And there was a point where, I'm about 230, 240 pounds at the time. Still doing.
So you put on a significant amount of size.
Significant amount of size and a significant amount of strength. I'm going up against guys. I remember my first rugby match. The team from San Marcos, Texas had a big Samoan athlete. I'm talking like 330 plus pounds and legs the size of tree trunks. And I remember I was playing, I was playing as a lock, and we were the forwards. We were there, the ones getting the direct hits with the opposing team. And there were many times where it was me versus this big Samoan dude.
Yeah.
But a lot of the foundation that I had built through deadlifts, through squats, through these big compound powerlifting motions, they had built the core strength and the total body power to where I saw this guy at the start of the game and I was fearing him a little bit, but I went into each hit hard and not holding back. And there were times where I floored him.
That's awesome.
And I was able to keep running through past him. And I'm like, this guy outweighs me by almost 100 pounds and I am holding my own.
Sure.
So that realization of power and that I definitely belong here, that I've built myself in a way to where I can hold my own.
Yeah.
That was incredible. Very incredible to experience. And I wanted to just continue to get better. And I think back towards those early days of, watching World's Strongest Man on TV. And I think back to how I've built this amazing base in myself, this bigger physique and stronger physique. And it seemed like the natural thing to do to reach out to a local strongman that I had heard of to start training with him. And I used it as my excuse to get better on the rugby field.
Yeah.
But there was also, those embers burning from early on, like, hey, I want to try some of this strongman stuff. I've seen it before. I want to lift the stones. I want to pull trucks. And it was just, as quick as jumping in on that first strongman Saturday with him that I realized I have what it takes to do this.
That's cool.
And that realization of power, of my deadlift strength, my overhead strength, that's where it all began. That's where the strongman side of Gabe Pena began, was seeking out, improving better on the rugby field. And
so you were 22, 23?
22 at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. 22. This was 2012.
So it was just the first day of training that it was like, I love this.
Yeah. I loved it. And I knew this was late 2022 and I knew of a competition that was happening in early 2023.
Okay.
And I started putting my efforts towards that. And I was still doing rugby at the time, still doing rugby, playing rugby games on the weekends. And then, it was a crazy thing to compete in rugby one day and then go to strongman training on Sunday.
It's different. Yeah.
Different. But a lot of those lessons also gave me the invaluable insight on how to measure your overall performance and recovery capacity on a weekly basis.
For sure. But, that's fascinating, man. So you're got your feet wet, so to speak, with this. And I'm assuming they had a lot of the implements and things that you needed to train with. So were you going to a normal gym during the week and then going there, or were you doing all your training?
No, it was normal gym during the week. I was still working at this local gym. It was called Freedom Fitness. And I had met my wife there while I was working as a supervisor for the front desk staff. But through my continued performance increases, I didn't want to just be behind the desk and cleaning machines. I started working with the personal training company that called that gym home. And so I was a personal trainer. Perfect. And later on, I found myself as the head trainer on that location. And I kept improving in my own life, and that reflected in a lot of the other lives that I helped coach and train. And that was a really cool thing. But
so that was something you gravitated toward early, with training people, helping them out, inspiring them. And
definitely.
It's still something you do now. You coach people and help them out. And we can talk more about that for sure. But going into this strongman arena, right? You set your goals on this first contest. What was that like?
putting in all the work in the months of prep, it was incredible to see my numbers build up. I had started strongman training with this local athlete, and I think I had pulled my best deadlift was 635 at the time. And over the course of the build-up to that prep, I had gotten a 700-pound deadlift.
That's awesome.
And there was a max deadlift event in this first competition, and my big goal for that contest, I wanted to pull 725. I wanted 7 plates and a quarter on each side. I wanted to do it. And I did just that. And I have some photos of that day from that contest. I'm wearing those old Vibram 5-finger toe shoes at the time. I got a buzz cut going on, wearing my rugby shirt for that competition. And I won that contest. It was my first strongman competition. It was at the River Rat Gym in Far, Texas, and I won. And it was to win that first strongman competition after the months of prep I had put into it. That just further solidified the notion that this is a path that I want to follow and just give it my all.
Yeah.
And, winning that first contest, it was just a week before my birthday. After the contest, that next weekend of training, another big pivotal point had happened in my strongman career, or my strongman life, I should say. It wasn't a career at that point, but I was training the axle clean and press on Strongman Sunday with the crew that we had at the guy's house.
And this is a week after that first.
A week after the contest. This was literally the day after my birthday. And on the axle clean and press, I had never done it before. And we had 250 on the bar. We had warmed up to that point, and I had paused midway up the clean. And I don't know why I had paused, but then that pull, the underhand pulled so hard, my bicep snapped right off. And I remember feeling that and hearing it. It was like being a kid playing with silly putty, and when you pull it too quick, that very quick, and you felt it.
Yep.
And in that moment, the bicep retracts, and my buddy who'd been doing strongman for a while, he looks at me, he's like, I see his jaw drop, and he's like, "You tore your bicep." And my whole life just was like, I burst into tears because I had just won my first strongman contest. Yeah. I had seen nothing but golden light shining on the path ahead.
Yep.
And then I was faced with the reality that I needed surgery. And that really sucked. But it was an invaluable lesson to learn how real the repercussions of doing things the wrong way, or just how quickly from 0 to 60 the nature of this is.
Yeah.
And I had, of course, I got my bicep repair. I was very fortunate to be able to have my parents supportive of me at the time. They helped, they paid for the surgery, and they made sure that I was put back together. And I remember I got that surgery 4 days after the injury. A very quick turnover.
That is very quick. Yeah.
From what I've learned over the years, that is much quicker than a lot of the athletes are able to.
You have a very short window after a bicep tear to get it repaired before you start to have problems with that. So the faster you can get it done, the better, for sure. And it's fascinating, and you probably know this about me too. My bicep on an axle at the Arnold, right? So that's a story that I've shared before, but it'll be interesting. I'm curious, going from that high point, a week later, here we go, bicep tear, surgery 4 days later. Where was your head? Where was your head with that?
Even facing the surgery and the operation, there was never a single doubt in my mind that strongman was anything but something that I belonged in. So my head was still very focused on it. It was like, all right, let's get this surgery done. Let's do some research and find out what the best path forward is in terms of recovery. And let's put in the work and get it done. I mean, every day that goes by, I'm getting closer to being able to get back to competition. But, having a torn bicep, that put rugby on the back burner. I'm not catching balls. I'm not running. I'm not tackling people with the torn bicep. So rugby was on the back burner. And even when I recovered, I felt so attached to strongman and just getting stronger and being a strong person that I could not rationalize the dividing my efforts and my recovery capacity up between rugby and strongman. I knew that, if I did both, I was not going to be great at both. I would be good at both, but I could not be the level that I wanted to be, in either. And more important, I knew my heart was in strongman.
Yeah.
And so through that,
that's an important realization to make, though.
It is. And it's a tough one to make too, because I would still go out to the local dive bar and see all the guys out there drinking after practice, having a good time. Like, Gabe, when are you going to come back out, man? We need your power out there on the field. Like, I don't think it's going to happen, guys. It's, and I, through the recovery for the biceps injury, I was still training. I was doing a lot of unilateral training. I had remembered reading some articles that if you keep up with the training on your healthy side. Your body is less inclined to atrophy on the recovering side just because it wants to keep that level of symmetry from right to left. And having that stimulus on the right, your atrophy capacity would be much lower than it would versus otherwise. So I was still doing unilateral arms training, but I was doing a lot of squatting. I was able to still thankfully do deadlifts. So my deadlift never really took a back burner. I didn't have to wear a strap either. Just the way that the bicep was repaired, I was able to maintain an overhand grip and use straps and still hit my deadlift hard.
How soon did you start doing that after the repair?
I want to say after the initial first 6 weeks, I was able to start getting back to just heavy deadlifts.
So it wasn't like immediate.
Wasn't immediate. I mean, I was still deadlifting, but I wasn't doing 6 plates. I was doing maybe like 225 for
But once
reps.
you could straighten your arm out and be comfortable with it, you could strap in, and that's very much the same for me. It was, you can do that, but first and foremost, you got to get the full range of motion back and that type of thing. But it sounds like you handled it great, man. I did the exact same thing with training the other side and didn't really skip a beat, to be fair. I worked on things I needed to work on. So it sounds like you did the same thing, which is awesome.
And knowing that my endeavors were more along the route of strength, I wanted to, I adopted more of a powerlifting style training. I knew that I could squat, I could deadlift, and I could bench press. And I knew that having those 3 core lifts and my regimen centered around them, I could still be making the gains, and I wasn't going to be losing any. I was actually going to still be making progress, even though I couldn't do the strongman stuff. And at the time, I was following Brandon Lilly. He, his cube method for strongman was something, or his cube method for powerlifting. And then knowing that Josh Thigpen had done the cube method for strongman also, keeping myself very in tune with that style of training rotation, being able to do things with, the squat, the deadlift, and the bench press as my core lifts. I was still doing competitions. I was doing deadlift competitions at the university. I did a bench press competition in one of the neighboring cities. I kept the competitive fires burning. And it took me the better part of a year to get back to strongman. I remember the hardest thing for me to get back to doing was stones. Yeah. I just never felt comfortable with that initial bent elbow pull trying to lift these rocks off the ground. It was tough to get back to. But my wife was competing strongman at the same time. She was, of course, coming out to training on those strongman Sundays with the local athletes.
That's really cool, man. So that you guys were able to continue the working relationship or working out relationship, into that as well. So she was, I would imagine, super supportive of you and great to have in your corner as you were coming back from this and rehabbing and that type of thing. And having that support system, and like you said, your parents being supportive of it as well, is something that's so valuable. And it's neat to hear that. It's something that I was very fortunate to have as well. My parents were really supportive of me. I mean, my first gym, I took over their garage, literally. They couldn't park in there anymore because that's where I was going to train, and they were totally cool with it and didn't quite know everything about strongman and what I was trying to do, but they were supportive. So it's neat to hear you had that support, and then your, I guess at that point, future wife was in your corner as well, and you're coming back from this. So, I remember the same thing, man. The stones, lifting the first heavier stone, it was such an amp up to do that for me, and I was like, you know what? I'm ready. I know I'm healed. I know I've done what I need to do. I'm just going to grab this thing. And it was kind of, you do it the first time, and then it happens, and you're just like, oh my God, okay, cool, I'm good. And then you go on, and eventually, once you do it enough, you work through those mental hurdles that you have to work through. And so you're a year out from this, and then you pick another contest to compete in at that point, or how did that go?
Well, so getting back to the stones and strongman, there was actually a key influential figure in helping me to realize or to get over those mental hurdles that I faced.
Okay.
So Bianca was still competing throughout this whole time, and she competed at a nationals qualifier, and she won that competition, and she qualified to Strongman Corp Nationals, or NAS at the time, in Reno, and this was 2014 Nationals, and I was still recovering. I still wasn't able to do stones at the time, and so I went there with her to her first nationals, knowing that this was a platform that I knew I belonged at. So I'm there, of course, first and foremost, supporting her and everything, but also observing and watching very closely the heavyweight athletes. And John Anderson was a judge there at the time, and I knew who John was.
John is a character.
He is a character, and he is well versed in many different styles of competition.
Yes,
and as a judge there, I got to talk to him a couple times, and one of the times I knew he had torn a bicep before, and I was like, John, how do you get over the mental hurdles with getting back to strongman training? I'm finding it so hard to get back to stone lifting. And he just looks at me. He's like, Gabe, at a certain point, you just got to man up and stop being a little bitch and pick the stone up. I'm like, all right. Yes, sir.
He has that unique, deep voice saying that. So it's like, hey, Gabe, you got to get in there and just do it and don't be a pussy. Let's go.
That's exactly it, man. And, having someone who I knew had been at World's Strongest Man, who was a pro wrestler and a pro bodybuilder.
Yeah.
Having him tell me that, it really
just clicked. Something clicked.
Stuck. And so I remember getting back from nationals and going back to some stones, and I was like, I know this stone is only 175 pounds. Let's just lift it up. The mental, all that you're feeling is probably just scar tissue making you think. It's been a year, Gabe. Come on. Yes. Those tendons are locked in place. Let's go. And I did. And those stones just started getting bigger and bigger. And before I knew it, I was back in a strongman contest.
So how did you feel from a observation standpoint, watching that level with the heavyweights you're paying attention to? I mean, mentally at that point, had you seen those guys at that level before, or that was the first experience watching them? And obviously you said you felt like that's where you should be. Did you feel that way watching them, or what was your perspective there?
I watched these guys knowing 100% that I could do what they were. There was definitely guys who were really strong, and Instagram was already a part of my life at that time. So a lot of these guys, the Hodge brothers, Alan Colley, even Martins Lisis, who was just a twig compared to what he is now at the time. I remember seeing him do pistol squats as a warm-up for card deadlift at that show. But these were guys that I had all seen on Instagram. And so getting to meet them in person, talking with them, and then watching them in the moment at this national championship, realizing that these were the trials that I know I need to be facing, and seeing them do these things, seeing the way that they conduct themselves, their techniques, their level of strength. It just was more affirmation that this is where I belong. And I took, even though I wasn't competing and I was a spectator at the time, I took all that experience and learned from every single bit that I could. And it definitely, I came out of that nationals as a spectator just as strong, or just as much of an increase as someone who had been there competing, because I was just trying to take that much away from it.
It's really important to have those experiences and to see that level and to visualize yourself doing it as well and being there. But it's neat that you were able to see that, because then you can kind of take that experience back to training and say, all right, here's what I've got. I got to see my competition and where I need to be. So you go back to training with a fire, I would assume at that point that, all right, I'm going to do this and I'm going to make it happen.
Yeah. I mean, and of course with those words from John Anderson too, like that fire was all too hot by the time I got back home and started training, and it was reignited, and getting those mental victories on doing the stones again, and everything just clicking with this newfound experience of watching these high level athletes, of watching what it took for them to win. And that was the competition where Alan Colley won his pro card, and seeing that path right before me, like from local to regional to nationals to pro level. The path is paved. This is it, Gabe. You know what you got to do. Let's put the nose to the grindstone and get to work.
So how did you get to that point then? Your first nationals was 15?
My first nationals was the next year, 2015.
Okay.
And so I was doing state level competitions, getting my qualifications. I think the next competition that I had entered in was only a few months after nationals, after that 2014 nationals. And I got first place. I won my nationals invite, and from then forward up until nationals next year, it was just about, let's just get strong. Let's hone all the events, hone all the skill. And so nationals 2015 came around. It was, I think that one was in Quad Cities, Iowa for the first time. And I had placed third overall. Okay. I had gotten my Arnold invite, and I was up again and third overall. I mean, I weighed in just barely under 300, so I was not part of the super heavies at the time. But seeing how my score measured up to the guys who were 100 pounds heavier than me, it's just all these factors that just add even more fuel to the fire. Like, Gabe, this is your path, man. You can do this.
Yeah, getting third there is it got to be a big, feather in your cap, so to speak, and reinforcing all of these things you've been thinking and reinforcing all the hard work as well, everything you've been putting into that. So did you feel like, and I already know your answer to this, but you've probably felt like you learned so much from going through that experience the year before. You saw it, now you're there, now you're on the podium, third place, going forward, gaining all these experiences. And I just from our short talks that we've had, I can tell that you're learning and learning and learning and just getting better and better, and then going back and applying it, and this is something that up and comers, the sooner you learn to do that with yourself, and I say even for myself, I'll still learn stuff from contests that I do, and I'm always trying to improve in some way, shape, or form. It might be the smallest little thing, but I'm picking something up, I'm learning something different, and you're taking that wealth of knowledge then to the next contest and the next contest. So where did your path go from there? Your third place there and moving forward.
The next step was the Arnold. I qualified for the Arnold with that third place podium. And so I knew the Arnold was coming up in like 5 or 6 months ahead, up in March. And to have my first nationals that I was competing in, to podium and to get my qualification to the world championships for the amateurs. I mean, this was huge. This was massive. And I did not want to let this opportunity go by without me fully giving it my all. So even just coming out of that nationals, like you said, watching all those videos over and over and over, dissecting every minute detail and finding all the areas I could improve. I applied that through all my training, and next came the Arnold and my first world championships, the world stage, a 2-day competition.
And that's 2016.
This is the 2016 Arnold,
okay.
My first world championships. And we had gone through all the preliminary qualifiers, the qualifying rounds, and I remember placing well and doing well in every event. And then when it came time to that last qualifying event, I was going up against a Polish athlete, Mateusz Ostaszewski, and we were neck and neck, tied in, or like it was anyone's game between us, whoever won that last event. And I remember picking up the last sandbag in the loading medley, and he picked his up vertical. I knew from my training that if I picked it up horizontal, it would give me more leg space to move. And sure enough, he picked his up before I did, but I picked mine up horizontal and I just took off.
That's awesome.
And I beat him. And I finished going into the finals in first place out of everyone on this world stage. And another pivotal moment where it's just, Gabe, you belong here.
Yep.
And so going into the finals, my first finals at my first Arnold, we were backstage warming up, and that was actually the first time I met you. You had just come in 2016. Okay. You were just coming down from the main stage after loading the world record Atlas stone, still tackied up, covered in tacky. You got your sleeves all taped up, and I just look. I'm like, this guy is so much bigger than the movies and the YouTube do him justice. But we have a picture that we took that day, and just the size of your fist next to mine in that picture. It was one of those moments like
that's awesome,
where you realize that you're somewhere where you belong because you are among the top caliber of athletes. And I had wound up finishing that Arnold in 4th place out of the best of the world's
which
amateurs.
is, I mean, pretty incredible from, if you look at it, really. I mean, that's not an easy contest, and nationals go into that. I mean, you're walking in and 3rd place in nationals, 4th place there. That's awesome, man. I mean, it's got to be such a reinforcement again to your hard work and where you're going and where things are taking you at that point. So leaving the Arnold, what was the path then?
Oh, Brian, I was hungry, man. I was so, finishing the finals in first, or finishing the qualifiers, going into the finals in first, and then coming out in 4th overall. That was like, Gabe, you can do this. Let's go for it. Let's get that pro card, whatever it takes. Let's do it. And I just hit training hard. And I kept immersing myself in competitions. I always felt like if the sooner, for me, I always felt the sooner I can get to that next biggest stage, the sooner I will conquer it.
Yep.
I don't want to be one of these guys who never feels good enough or ready. I want to be the guy who builds myself as best as I can and just immerses myself in the challenge, and let's see where I stack up, because no matter what happens, I will come out of that experience stronger and more able for what comes next. And after the Arnold, I knew where I belonged, and I knew I wanted to go against pros. So there was a Giants Live qualifier in Martinsville, Indiana, and it was a pro-am. So pros were able to, or amateurs were able to compete against pros. And I heard about this competition. I'm like, I want in. And I drove all the way across the country with my wife and another friend to compete there, and it was a 26-hour drive.
Wow, that's awesome.
I had just gotten my Chevy Colorado at the time too, so that was the inaugural road trip.
Breaking it in for sure.
Breaking it in, traveling up there, and then I remember these guys were like, "This amateur drove all the way across the country from South Texas to be here," and I remember I had met Rob Kearney for the first time there, competed with him. Marshall White was there. Johnny Wasisco, just a lot of the guys that I know are still the high-level pros nowadays, but that was the first time I got to compete against them. And it was a tough contest, a very tough contest. And I wound up finishing probably somewhere like towards the maybe like 12 to 11 out of 16 athletes. So not last, but definitely stacked up. And I had pulled a really big deadlift. We were doing a tire axle deadlift, and I beat a lot of the pros on that deadlift. I knew I had a strong deadlift, but getting to have it measure against pros, I mean, that was another moment. Like, hey, you've got some real power here, Gabe. Let's keep honing in, because
it sounds like, you know, early on you mentioned with your first contest, the deadlift was a big thing and pulling that 725, and now, you know, different contests you've done. Is it just kind of a natural connection that you started to form with the deadlift, and it was just something you gravitated towards and were good at, so you kind of became known for that? Because I mean, before I had met you, and I don't remember where I had heard it, but you know, maybe going into one of the nationals or something, somebody was saying something about your deadlift training, you know, that you were pulling something big and, you know, that type of thing. So it's definitely something that I think a lot of people have started talk about you with regard to your deadlift. I mean, is that where it started getting reinforced? Like, okay, I'm pretty good at deadlifting ability here.
Seeing how it stacked up against the pros, and then of course at the Arnold World Championships that in 2016, I got first place in the deadlift event with a pretty obscene amount of reps, and it was that much higher than everyone else. Where it was like, you are a deadlifter, Gabe.
And that may have been where I heard about it too. 16, somebody who said something about it there.
Maybe it was Obi, because Obi was watching right front and center in that for that one.
Okay,
he might have seen it, and we all know how Obi loves his deadlift. So
no, it's awesome, and I mean it's neat to hear about that, and you know, especially when you're on that stage and can stand out in a particular event. I mean, that's huge, man. So you go to this pro-am, and I feel like for me, I actually went to the way that it used to work when I was coming up was you would go from the amateur contest, and pro-ams were everything. That's all it was. There was no, you know, kind of level to it. If you wanted to earn your pro card, you went to a pro-am. The pros competed, and then the top placing amateur got their pro card that day. So, you know, I remember for me going to my first one, I drove from Colorado to St. Louis, and I had literally just started Strongman. I didn't even have any equipment, you know, because back then it wasn't very easily accessible. So I was just like, hey, I'm going to do this. And my parents were like, all right, well, we'll go with you. So it's like I took a road trip. They drove out to watch, and I just, you know, kind of rode or drove with them or whatever. And I got to that contest, and I didn't have social media. I didn't have anything. It was you mailed your entry in, and you just entered. So I didn't know who was going. I didn't know who was showing up. And I just knew the events. And I said, all right, I'm going to go. And, you know, I went that day, and you know, that contest I walked into, and I remember the guys being so big and strong, and especially compared to, I had only done two kind of local amateur contests, one here in Colorado and one in New Mexico. And then this was not even 2.5 months in, then I was like, all right, I'm going to go do this pro-am because I want it. I'm hungry. And that was an experience walking away from that, because it's a different level of guys there that I had to compete against. And so I walked out, and I did not place well. I was, you know, 13th out of maybe, I don't know, 16, 17, 18 athletes. And it was like, wow, it was eye-opening. Like I had some stuff to work on. But again, it was just that hunger to go compete. And I wanted to test myself against better athletes. And it sounds very similar to you. Hey, this is open. I'm going to hop in the truck. I'm driving. I'm going. And we're going to lay it all out on the line and see what happens. And I think that quality is very important. You know, instead of being scared in a way to say, well, is it going to be perfect for me? Is it not? It's like there's an opportunity there. I'm taking that opportunity, and I'm going to learn from it. And I may not win, but I'm going to get better. And I need this experience to get better. And I'm hungry for that competing and hungry for that opportunity. So it's neat to hear that, man. It's so reminiscent of what I was kind of going through as well. You're just hop in the car and you drive. And you say, I'm showing up and I'm here. and let's go. And, you walk away from that, and I'm sure, you get to meet a lot of these guys, like you mentioned, that were there, that you've seen, and you get to line up against them, and you get to lay it on the line and see where you're at, and kind of walk away from that contest with a certain level of experience that you can't get anywhere else. You're not going to get that experience by staying at home and watching. You have to go do it. You
Absolutely.
have to put yourself out there.
And it's totally naive for people to think that you can just train yourself and go into a contest and just dominate. Sure, it happens every now and then, but that's an outlier. That's the athletes who are at the top of the game are there because they have an accumulation of years and years of experience of constantly testing themselves and measuring themselves up to what is the standard in this sport. And it's that experience that yields the greatness, and you have to earn it. And I see it all too much in whether it's people that I coach or just people that I'm aware of, that they never think they're good enough. And they are always their worst enemy in holding themselves back. They never get that invaluable experience, and they're always behind their closed doors. And it's an injustice to their competitive ambitions, and it really hinders their progress. But that was never something that I wanted for myself. I wanted to always have those tests. I wanted those trials. I embraced them.
So how from that point, where does the pro card come in? Where do you kind of make that leap, or what's, because that was 2016 Arnold. That contest was in 2016
as well.
Okay.
So I didn't get my pro card until 2019.
Okay.
But I tried every step of the way, and it takes more than one hand to count the amount of half-point second place finishes that I had, where I just missed that pro card by such a small, minute error. And I remember a specific competition. It was Southeast Strongest Man in Florida, another competition that was it was a Platinum Plus competition yielding a pro card. And I drove from South Texas, 18 hours all the way to the tip of Florida to go do it. And it was I had been keeping. Trey Mitchell was at that competition too, and then another high-level strongman at the time, Davis Dilly, and we were going through the events. I was keeping a high placing. I got first in the yoke. That was actually the first time I won money from an event. Alan Colley had put some money on the line. Great, he was like, whoever gets first place in the yoke, I will pay you some money because I'm a good yoker and I respect that. And I got first place in the yoke, and it was crazy because I didn't think I did that well on the yoke, and I thought I moved a lot slower than I did, and they showed me my time, and it just blew everyone out of the water. So that was awesome. Cool on its own, but we had a brutal keg carry medley for that one. It was 6 kegs staggered over a 75-foot course.
Wow, okay.
6 kegs, and you had to start from that first one, take it down to a loading mat, run back, and just back and forth for all 6 of these. And by the time I got to one of the last kegs, I didn't have it up high enough, and I was so fatigued from all these other points that I had fumbled it, I dropped it, and I had to pick it back up, and then that let one other athlete get slightly ahead of me in points. Man. And it was that small margin of points that wound up having the other athlete get a half point ahead of me in the end. Davis Dilly won his pro card at that competition, and very strong athlete. He kind of won his pro card and stopped competing after that.
Okay.
So there was always that, like, man, if I had just been a little bit better and not fumbled the keg or gotten more points, then I would have had my pro card and I would be using it. I would be doing all these competitions and really making waves in the strongman world. But those little narrow losses, Brian, they really added more and more fuel to the fire, that even though I kept being faced with these narrow shortcomings, I learned from every one of them. That increased the specialist aspect of, I wanted to be perfect at everything. I didn't want to have these small newbie errors. I wanted to have pro level strength, pro level skill, and all the competitions I did, more national championships. I did more Arnold World Championships. In 2019, I did the Strongman Corp National Championships. It had gotten rescheduled because it was originally supposed to be in Florida. Hurricane Dorian came through, and they had to reschedule it and move it to Quad Cities, Iowa, another month later. So athletes are having to adapt, and some athletes are griping and moaning like, oh, this curveball, we've been prepping so long. I'm like, the one who wants it is going to adapt and make it happen. And I did just that. My prep was on point leading up to Florida, and it continued to remain on point leading up to the rescheduled day in Iowa, and I dominated. And I knew what I was going there for, and I did just that. Prior 2018 was a pivotal year for me in strongman. My wife and I got married in 2018, in May of 2018, and I had taken over my gym Alpha Fit in late 2016, I believe. And along with taking over Alpha Fit, and I had never taken any business classes. I was very much a rookie in the business world. I was learning a lot of hard lessons, and with those hard lessons came a lot of stress. And it would show itself here and then in my competition ability. And I would say 2017 was a very foggy year for me. And even 2018, leading up to when Bianca and I got married, competition had taken a bit of I wouldn't say a back burner, but it was definitely buffered a little bit. Late 2018, I did a competition right here in Colorado, in Denver. And it was a USS competition, my first time competing outside of Strongman Corporation, but I dominated that contest. And I was up against some very impressive athletes there. But I remember winning that competition, and that was like a big turnaround for me, where I had just prepped hard for it. We had just relocated my gym to a new place and was starting from the ground up, even facing a lot of the stress, getting out of the stressful environment of the old gym, the old building, starting a new road, seeing that victory in late 2018. I knew that I was on an upward trend. I signed up for California's Strongest Man in March of 2019. I knew it was a Platinum Plus show. I could qualify for the Arnold there. They weren't doing pro cards anymore, but I won that competition. I dominated that one. And I have a fond memory of Martins Lisis being a judge there watching the deadlift event. And it was 700 pounds for max reps, and I pulled 10 reps. And that gave me a very easy victory on the event. And Martins comes up to me after. He's like, Gabe, I like your deadlift. You use a lot of legs. I'm like, what did World's Strongest Man just tell me right there? But you know, he that was another just a really good feel-good thing to hear. But that victory at California's Strongest Man in 2019, that momentum riding right after the foggy time of my career, I was on an upward trend. And so going into that 2019 Nationals later on in the year, it was clear to me that I was going to get my pro card. And I went there with the intent. I just did just that. Yeah, I became a pro in 2019.
I mean, it sounds like your path was unique in a lot of ways, right? Because you have, you know, compared to, say, someone like me, I competed and I did that pro-am, went to another one. So that was in January. I went to another one in May. And then there happened to just be another one in June. So the one in May, I went from getting that, you know, 13th or whatever place I got in that one to getting third. And then I won it, my pro card, the next month. So I was basically, from the time I started Strongman to the time I was a pro, was about 6 months, give or take. But I was hungry for it. And I, you know, made a big change from not training with any of the equipment to actually getting a few implements that a guy welded for me, helped me tremendously. And then I was able to take that path. So very different to what you went through and your buildup. And like you said, those second places, those half points, those little errors or changes in the contest that will eat at you. A lot of times you learn a lot from winning, for sure, but you also can, in a lot of ways, learn more from losing, right? And where do you need to be perfect? And I feel in a lot of ways from hearing you talk about it, you probably were able to refine a lot of things, and you looked at details a lot more closely, because a half a point will eat at you. I mean, I know probably better than anybody about ties and these type of things, second places that were close. And, you know, when you start to analyze contests that way, it can teach you a lot. But when you bring it back to training, it makes the importance of training so much more clear, right? Because you're going in there, and when you're applying it to your training, you're not training for 5 more reps. You're training for 1 when you need it, right? So every training session becomes, is this the training session that I'm going to gain that 1 more rep? Or am I going to get just a half a second faster or 0.2 of a second faster? All those things become so magnified as you're going through and training for these things to be the best that you can be on the day. And you're hungry for this competition, and you know, to come that close and then to go through the things that you went through with your life, you know, and you're calling it a foggy period, but that's a big undertaking, man. You took over a gym, you moved a gym, right? You're getting married. This is a big life change. And so, you know, to stay on track during that type of period is good. And in a lot of ways, I guarantee that taught you a lot about yourself, and you're forming your life as well, right? You're now a business owner, and you have a gym that is relying on you, that you in a lot of ways are married to as well, because the success of that gym is dependent on you and your wife and what you guys put into it and how you apply yourselves to that. So being able to take that energy into the gym, but then also apply it to your competition. And, now you're a new husband and there's a lot of things going on. So it's neat to hear you go through that, as you called it, a foggy period, to having some clarity of like, look, I came in and dominated, because up until this point, you hadn't used that word dominated. I dominated this contest, and then I dominated this contest. And what you're doing, I like to call it a lot of positive momentum, right? So you're building this positive momentum where you're walking into these contests at that point, and I guarantee you're walking into training with the same mental ability to think, I'm going to dominate, and you just have all this positive momentum that's building up into 2019, and then 2019, I guess, is the pro card experience where you get this finally. It's, all these second places, all these experiences, everything I've gone through. Now here it is, right? I've kind of reached my goal. But at that point, now you've got the pro card, and you have to move forward from the pro card, right?
Right.
So how was that? What was your thought process? Because somebody made a comment to me, and I don't know that this is 100% true, but when I earned mine in that contest, somebody said something along the lines of, okay, today you got your pro card, you're the best amateur in the country, but you're also now the worst pro, which I would argue with, because I guarantee I was not the worst pro at that point. I could have beat somebody, I promise that. But, it's kind of like that perspective of, okay, now I'm the top, I'm into this next class, I've now leveled up to that spot. But what was your mentality?
Yeah, I had a voice like that also, someone telling me something similar. And, there was that realization too, but, there was all this build up to that moment. So you can see it in any of the pictures that I took at the awards ceremony for nationals. I've just got the biggest cheese and smile on my face, because
rightfully
I
so.
did what I set out to do, and it felt damn good. But that next day, I knew it was the start of the next phase. Like you said, made it to the top of the amateurs. Now I got to work my way up from the bottom of the pros. And it was kind of like starting over on a new journey, a new journey where it's a new caliber of athlete. We've been working to get to this point so that we can work for the ultimate goals.
Yes.
It was always, I always knew that it was not an end point like some of the other guys that I come across over the years.
You see a lot of guys, like you mentioned earlier, certain guys, they almost know it's the end of their game. Right?
And total respect for them for that.
Totally.
Everyone's life is their own to live, and I'm not going to cast judgment on the way that they do, unless it's harming someone. But, mad respect to the guys who still go out, they get their pro card, and if they feel like that's it for them, so be it. But there was that part for that aspect that was like, man, I know I can put that to a lot more use, so let me make sure I get it mine. But I did acknowledge the fact that it was, I knew that I was going to be setting on another adventure that was a bigger adventure, a lot higher stakes, but that was what I wanted. The beauty, I've always held true to myself that the beauty is not so much in the end point, but it's in the journey to get there. That's where you learn the most about yourself. Talking about the things that I faced, I look back on all those, whether it's the half-point losses or the foggy time in my life where I was, taking over all of the business side of running a gym. That all just added to the strength and the philosophy and who I am today. It made me even better and stronger for it. And I really love having that part of me actualized to face what comes next and the trials that are ahead, because I feel more well equipped because of them. But I knew it was taking on a whole bigger world. And I had one more amateur contest. I qualified for the Arnold World Championships one more time. It was my last amateur show, and it was 2020. I went in that one like I knew I'm a pro. Like I'm a pro now, even though this is the Amateur World Championships. I want to give it my all, because of course there's that invite to the Arnold Classic, on the line, and I wanted that, and I gave it my all. I went into the finals, I believe, also, and I think I finished in first place going into the finals. But yeah, I did, because I dominated that deadlift event. I really did. We had a deadlift medley, and that really sealed the deal for me. But the finals, we had a circus dumbbell and we had a hand over hand sled drag, and two of the Russian athletes just really turned up on that last day, and they got first and second. I got third, but very narrow margins.
Yeah,
it was just those last two events were not my strong suits compared to them. But I gave it my all, and I still podiumed, and it was my highest placing at the Arnold.
Yeah,
but, that was how I wrapped up my amateur career, we could say. And then that paved the way for what came next later on in the year, which was my pro debut at World's Strongest Man 2020.
Yeah, so let's get into that.
Let's get into that.
Yeah,
what a contest to have as your pro debut.
Yeah, it's quite a pro debut. I mean, what were you thinking? What were you thinking? I mean, you get the call up, you're in.
Well, I got the call up as an amateur.
Yeah,
and, of course, 2020 we're COVID, right?
Yes.
We're right in the middle of the pandemic. And of course, the main athletes that they originally had on the roster, some people just didn't have the ability to
get there,
overcome whatever hardships they faced because of the pandemic we were all going through. And so I got the call that I was an alternate. And I mean, just getting that call is like, whoa,
it's exciting. Man.
What?
Yeah, for sure.
And then a couple of weeks later, the call came in like, you're no longer an alternate. You're on the roster. And that realization, like, holy hell, my first pro show is going to be the big one,
for sure.
World's Strongest Man 2020. This is it. And it was kind of a lot of those same feelings towards going into my first nationals, like all these guys who are clearly the best in the world. I'm competing with Brian Shaw here. Like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that freshman going into high school, right?
Yeah.
That first day of school, and you're just walking among athletes who are casting big shadows. But it was just an incredible experience. I knew that was where I belong. We talked about my philosophy of the sooner you get to that big stage, the sooner you conquer it. Yep. And so I was ready to just give it my all and fully immerse myself in the experience. And I mean, I went in charging hard into that competition. I built the biggest, strongest version of myself that there had been up until that point. So I felt very well equipped for that show. But even leading up into that prep, there was quite a bit of hardships going into this. And not many people know this. But right at the time, I want to say it was 3 weeks out of World's Strongest Man in 2020.
Okay.
I was with Cerberus Strength at the time, and they had just come out with a soft belt. And I had seen a lot of other athletes do the double belt combo, where they would put on the soft belt and then the lever belt on top of that.
Yep.
And I was like, let me try this out. I mean, more back support, and it's only going to make you better, right? So I had gone for a heavy deadlift max, and I had never used a double belt before. And I pulled a PR, which at the time for a raw lift was 910.
Okay.
It was 10 pounds higher than my heaviest raw lift ever. And I pulled a PR. But on the way up with that lift, with all that compression, Brian, I gave myself a hiatal hernia. Part of my stomach got pushed through my diaphragm and was on the same side of my diaphragm as my lungs. So there was 2 weeks leading up to that show where I'm feeling like I just got some sort of gastric digestive issue, and I had no idea. I mean, I knew hiatal hernias could happen, but it was the last thing in my mind as to what actually happened. I was like, I must have food poisoning. I was trying everything. I was working with my doctor and getting colon cleansings, like whatever could alleviate and make my job better, because I was in pain and misery.
Yeah.
After 12 days of nothing working, and going back and forth with my doctor, we finally were able to just figure out, like, you've got your stomach, a portion of your stomach is on the wrong side of your diaphragm. And we've got to find ways to get it to suck right back through. And what an opportune time. My pro debut at World's Strongest Man, 3 weeks out, there. And I have my stomach is herniated, like how freaking fitting, right?
Yeah.
But, knowing that was what it was, then it was a clear path forward. Okay, we got to do abdominal exercises that crunch and, self massages that really help push it down. And it probably took maybe like 4 or 5 more days beyond that point to get the stomach to go back there. But once it was right on the same side of the diaphragm again, we're set. And I was not going to wear a double belt again for a long time, I tell you that. But it was just one of those things, like, where you get served a big slice of, you didn't know this could happen, but it did. And you have more experience now thinking of how you can prevent things like that happening in the future. But
that's crazy. So you're dealing with that. You're trying to overcome that. Plus you've got this looming World's Strongest Man contest that's your pro debut there. And it's another obstacle you have to overcome. You get to the contest, and what were you thinking? I mean, walking in, you got the qualifying group. That year was a hurricane, tropical storm, whatever, that messed everything up, right? So they had to redo the events. There was a couple event changes that happened very, very last minute, which again was a curveball for everybody. Just like you said, with the nationals you did where the date moved. This is the same thing, right? Like a lot of us weren't prepared for those events, and they just had to move it inside because of the storm, and everybody's dealing with it in different ways. So that's a unique year, number one, to go into World's Strongest Man because it was strange, but then the event changes come as well on top. So I can only imagine. I mean, I know that I dealt with it a certain way, and I've been through a lot in my career, but having your pro World's Strongest Man debut happening and all these things are going on, I mean, that's a whole different thing, man.
It was one of those things where that has always been the ultimate goal, to compete at that stage.
Yeah.
And even with all the hardships and obstacles that I faced getting to that point, even in the recent weeks leading up to it, I was just so damn happy to be there. I wanted to give it my all and just really just take as much of it away as I could.
Yeah.
I mean, I went into that competition knowing that I have what it takes to get to the finals.
Yeah.
Trey Mitchell is a great buddy of mine. We both started competing strongman right at the same time, both Texas athletes. There were so many competitions where we would be the last two athletes gunning for that first place. He'd win one show, I'd win another show. And seeing how in 2019 he made it to the finals, I'm like, Trey made it to the finals, I can make it to the finals.
Yep.
I've beat him on things before. But and I knew my strengths, I knew where I measured up, and I knew I could do it.
Yeah.
So there was no lack of confidence on my end. But then there was also, all the curveballs that you mentioned, I'm from a part of Texas that we get hurricanes, like I said. And one of my biggest fears was like, I don't want to be in Florida for a hurricane because I know how Florida gets ravaged by these things. And sure enough, we had a hurricane in October when we were there. Yeah. But, with all those things going on, I'm like, this is my first year here. And, with the event changes, and I really loved and respected how you stood up for us as the athletes and making sure that the TV side of things didn't overlook us as, the reason why this is happening in the first place. And I loved how having your voice to care for the athletes, and I'm a newbie there. I'm not going to be the one to stand up and say anything. I'm going to be the one who's just going to sit back and like, well, let's let Brian talk for us. Let's see what they say. And I love what he's saying. Let me just go with that and as it plays out. But I was just happy to be there, and whatever wound up happening, competing in a convention center with no crowd versus, having done it on the beachfront, so be it. This is what it is, and I'm here. Let's make the most of it. So that's what it was.
So you went in. I know that you had a deadlift in your group, right? And you did well on that.
Yeah.
And I think you did all right on the farmers, if I remember.
I did okay on the farmers. Grip over the years historically has not been one of my strong suits. I think 2018 and 2019, I had a lot of ligament injuries in my fingers. The little pulleys that wrap around the knuckles, those ring-shaped ligaments that bind the tendons down. I've had those snap quite a few times in those years leading up to it. So it was not that I didn't have a strong grip. It's just that every time I would build up my strength, I would have to take a little step back because of these injuries. So going into the day one of the qualifying rounds with farmers as the first event, I was very worried that I was going to underperform. And I don't think I underperformed, but I was definitely not.
Yeah.
I was not one of the best performers by a long shot on that. So there was that, but I knew I had deadlift in my qualifying rounds, and I'm a deadlifter.
Yeah.
And so I knew I was going to just pull out all the stops and give it everything. And I got second place to Jerry.
Yeah.
In that, and Jerry just so cool and collectively pulled out one extra rep, not even phased. I'm like, well, yeah, of course, it's Jerry Pritchett, But I felt really good about my deadlift event, and so I finished that day one of the finals feeling in a good spot, ready to take what came next in day two. But that day one was, wow. I mean, they told us to be out the door by what, 8 a.m.
Oh, the timeline was not kept. I think all of us finished the day probably 8 or 9 o'clock at night, right? And this is the start of literally the start of World's Strongest Man. And because of the storm, and they were trying to start outside and pushing it back. Now all of our rest day was also gone, which a lot of people don't realize going between the finals, which very much for me changed my game plan in a big way. And, that's a whole different story. But going into day two for you, now you get another curveball, right? Like that's
Yeah, well, and so day 2, I wake up, and even at the end of day 1, we finally get back to the hotel like 9-10 p.m. and super late dinner, and we know we got day 2 the next day. But when I'm at the dinner table, I feel like I still haven't recovered. I still feel like my heart's beating quick, like I'm still. It feels like I'm catching my breath, but it's been an hour since I deadlifted.
Yeah,
and I'm there eating dinner. And I'm like, what? Maybe I just need a good night's sleep. And I wake up the next morning and I don't feel like I slept at all. On the bus ride over to the convention center, I'm falling asleep on the bus ride over there, and it's like something's up. And I could feel like my heart was pounding. Like it felt like there was a little rabbit beating in my chest.
Interesting.
And so I'm like, you know what? This is a serious sport. I know how quickly things can happen in this sport.
Yeah.
I owe it to myself to let me at least talk to the doctors and make them aware that I feel like something's off. And so I went and I talked to the medical staff on hand. They hooked me up to some diagnostic machines to check my heart rate and everything. And lo and behold, I was in AFib, atrial fibrillation. My heart was skipping beats. And why it was skipping beats was totally unbeknownst at the time. But, the medical staff at World's Strongest Man, the last thing they want is for anyone to black out or even worse when they've got, I know we had log on that day. We're putting a massive log up overhead.
Yep.
If I put a demand on my heart that's too tall of an order to fill, the lights go out and that thing comes down on top of me. I mean, we can easily be talking about a life or death situation there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So their biggest concern was my safety, and they, it freaking sucked, man. They pulled me out of the competition.
Yeah.
But, and I can understand why, but so happy to be there, so ready for the trials, and knowing that I have what it takes to make it to the finals. When they told me that, I mean, I remember I just took off. I just walked down the halls at the convention center. I mean, the tears were coming down.
Yeah,
man,
not a lot of people understand that level of commitment and desire, and getting to that level and then having that happen. Not a lot of people have experienced that, right? And there's a lot of emotion that comes along with that because of what you've gone through to get there. Right. And now here you are, you're on that stage. And so you get this told to you, okay, well, we're, based on you coming to us and saying this, it's not safe, we're pulling you out, whatever. Where do you go from there?
Well, I mean, like I said, I was walking around the convention center to take a lap and to clear just to deal with it felt like a swift blow of a hammer coming down on me. This news that they delivered, I just wanted to make them aware. Like, is there something they can give me, or just to make them know, in case. But last thing I thought was they're going to pull me out of the contest. So I'm just walking away and I'm just overcome with emotion and just the waterworks and everything like that. And then I just feel a hand on my shoulder. And I've already walked like a good 500 feet away from the competition floor. Yeah. I feel a big hand on my shoulder. I turn around, it's Bobby Thompson, and he's there. And I just needed a shoulder to put my head on at the time. Yeah. It was one of those moments where this is a guy who I know I'm going to consider to be a friend for the rest of my life, because he was there for me in a moment where I needed it most. And it was a powerful moment. But from that on, it was coming to terms with the deal. They sent me to the hospital, riding in an ambulance from the convention center to the hospital there in Florida. I felt so defeated, man. So defeated.
I can imagine. Yeah.
And, they get me there. I'm in the ER, and they have me hooked up to machines. They've got IVs in me, loading me with medication. And I'm there still in my World's Strongest Man shirt and shorts. And it's like I've gone from being surrounded with all of my friends, with this elite group of athletes that I know I belong amongst, and now I'm just alone in an ER room or in a hospital room, lonely as hell, knowing I'm missing everything that's going on there. And it really sucked. But once they got my heart rate to calm down, it had calmed down enough to where they felt comfortable discharging me after staying there for a night. Okay. That I was very adamant, I don't want to be here. You want me to be in a low stress situation. This ain't it. Get me.
You're giving me anxiety.
Yeah, this is worse. Let me go back. I'm not going to be competing. I'm already out, but let me go back. I want to watch these guys. I want to support my friends.
Yeah.
Trey has been like a brother to me. I want to see him. He's qualified to the finals. I Or
I totally understand that. Yeah. So they let you out, you get back to the contest, and obviously you've gone through this. It's like this roller coaster ride. I can only imagine, of emotion and anger and sadness, and it just all these things. I can hearing you talk about it, I'm putting myself in that position, and it's not a good position to be in. So you get back to the contest, head back from there. What was the reason behind it?
So we didn't know the reason exactly. It was kind of like you're served up with this big monumental thing that went wrong. And like anything else, like any injury that happens that we face, you start taking the I guess I call it the Sherlock Holmes approach, like seeing all the ways you can dissect, like all the factors, all the variables that could have attributed to it. I'm thinking that, okay, we've got all these changes in events happening. We've got a day that was spread out way longer than it should be. The meals, like we were told we're going to go on at a certain point, and it's been actually way longer since that last meal that we had. And I had put on a ton of weight for the show. I was walking around at 300. I think I weighed 333.
Okay.
Was the highest I measured going into that show. So this was the heaviest Gabe that there has ever been, even to this day. And I was strong as hell, but I'm like, maybe I just put too much of an emphasis on gaining weight and not enough of an emphasis on cardio.
Yeah.
And you're trying to figure out all these things over the years. Maybe it was, certain sugars I was taking. Maybe it was mineral deficiencies, things that I had gone back with my doctor after World's Strongest Man to try to figure this out, because we cannot have it happen again. I do not want to face a unfortunate occurrence of this happening in a similar situation where I make it to a high level contest and I have to pull out halfway through. Like,
absolutely.
And I also know, like, the way that the World's Strongest Man medical staff works, like if this happened again, like my chances of being able to compete are even further diminished.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get this thing addressed. And so we thinking that we're fighting these things, maybe it's magnesium or taurine, or maybe you gain too much weight. Like, let's keep up with the cardio. I was doing cardio with every training session at that point, just making sure that the heart could keep up. And it's been an ongoing thing to try to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Yeah. And even just this year, I say this year, 2021, late 2021, we finally found out, with dialing it in with my doctor, that it was nothing even close to as serious as we thought it was. It's not mineral deficiencies. It's not the heart being unhealthy. It's none of these grave impending things that I won't have as much control over. It's going to sound weird, and no one really knows this between me and my wife and my doctor, but I'm totally fine sharing it, because when I went through this at World's Strongest Man in 2020, I was open with it. I was putting out Instagram lives at the time, like letting people know what happened, and I had a lot of other people around the world reach out to me saying that they have chronic AFib, or that they're dealing with AFib, and then it's refreshing in a sense to see someone at the highest level of the strongman sport going through this, because they can relate to that, and they can kind of, how are you going about this, or this is how I went, like sharing the experiences. There's that level of unity in it, and when you're faced with something that happens to your heart, there's that level of fear of unknown, and that level of isolation. Like, I've got something wrong with my engine, and if something happens, then I'm done. Like, that's in the worst case scenario, I'm dead. And so when you have someone you can relate to who's pushing their performance to a high level, it's refreshing to know that there's that level of connection. So I have no problem talking about this, but I have what is called cold heart AFib. And it's a very weird phenomenon that if I have anything that is too cold go down my esophagus, the esophagus passes so closely to that left ventricle of the heart. If there is enough insulated cold in that food or drink matter that's going down, it'll essentially cause the heart to shiver and send it into AFib, and to where it'll correct itself over time, especially if I use medication to help correct it. But that's the trigger, Brian. And every time that at World's Strongest Man, they had those coolers filled with cold Gatorade.
Really cold,
really cold Gatorade. And there was two other occurrences outside of World's Strongest Man where I had, I'm in South Texas. It's freaking hot all the time. That I would keep a cold Gatorade, not in the fridge, but in the freezer, so I could go there.
And it's ice cold.
And it's ice cold. And within seconds of drinking it, I would feel that sensation in my heart. And I'm like, wait, what the hell happened? Did I push myself too hard in training? And it's looking back on these things and like seeing that, oh, there was Gatorade here, or there was a slushy here. I remember there was one point where it had resolved itself very quick, but even a very cold glass of milk late at night, right before bed, just chugging it for the sake of getting some nutrients down.
Yeah.
And then within like instantly feeling that rabbit sensation in the heart. And that was it. And I'm sure you might have noticed in the time that I've spent here with you, I have not put ice in my drinks.
Actually last night you were asking for water without ice.
Yeah.
And I didn't think anything of it. Some people just don't really like ice.
Well, now you get to learn why. But
yeah.
it
makes a lot of sense now.
There's only been 3 triggers that I know of. And it's a slushy, cold Gatorade, or milk or ice cream, like super cold really dairy cold products. So anything that has, either these high concentrations of sugar or lipids that can insulate that heat, that will really that can be problematic for me particularly, just because the permeating cold when it goes down the esophagus radiates, it makes the heart shiver, and that's all it takes. It's nothing serious, and it's the weirdest thing because there are so many doctors, especially in hospitals, that I've read accounts and records, and I've been doing so much research on this too, that doctors, even modern doctors nowadays, will not make the connection unless they are directly aware of this cold heart AFib. I could not find any testimonials or records earlier than 2004. Wow. And even then, it's so sparse, and doctors are so quick to dismiss, like, oh, you've got this, or something else. But it literally has to do with cold passing right by the heart.
I'll tell you what, man, I've learned something a day. It's fascinating, but it almost adds to my frustration for you because it is nothing serious, right?
Nothing serious, and it's so easily handled.
You're chugging these cold drinks or whatever there, and on site. And it literally puts you into AFib by consuming a really, really ice cold beverage, whatever.
And it's not just an ice cold beverage. I mean, it's only been triggers of super sugary or like dairy stuff that's cold.
So you've identified that, but either way,
even then, like I've never had ice cold water set me off. I've never had ice cold other things set me off. But just knowing the fact that AFib is a potential thing, it's a no-brainer for me. Like, as much as I love the cold, as I love being cold, I will sacrifice some ice cubes in my drink for the sake of not going into AFib again. It's such a weird thing, man.
It's neat, and thank you for sharing that story. I hope that in some way, shape, or form, like you said, can help people out because, at the end of the day, that's what I love to do. I love to help people out, to inspire people, to send a positive message. And there's different stuff that I've been through that I love to tell people about, and I've had other issues like that seem very strange and weird, and and I have shared them with people, and will continue to share them in different ways. And this podcast is going to be a way to do that. But it's neat to do that, and hopefully that can help somebody out. But walking away through that roller coaster ride. Right now, you know what it is. I mean, it must have made you feel so good to learn what it was. But now that that's behind you, right? What does the future hold for Gabe Pena? Where are we going now? Like, what's the track look like? I mean, you've done some great things, man. And even last year, you pulled 1,000-pound deadlift at Giants Live on a normal deadlift bar with calibrated plates, which was a monumental feat. And congratulations on that. I mean, that was huge, man. And then, from there, you came to the Shaw Classic on the Hummer tire deadlift. There you pulled 1,100 pounds, 500 kilos, which again is another monumental feat on that bar. And there's only so many people that have done that or accomplished that type of weight on there. So again, reinforcing, we're deadlifting, and you've had these really, really cool moments in the past year, 2021. But what's your angle? Like, where are you trying to go? Obviously, you're trying to improve. You're trying to get better. And, we haven't really talked about a lot about the message that you send out to people. And it's one of the things that I love about you is that, you put in hard work. You're a hard worker. and you put out positive messages. And, you know, it's just like the start of the podcast here, right? Like we're talking about, you know, the mountains and, you know, being grateful and thankful and, you know, being connected to nature in so many ways and grounded, right? And, you know, life perspective and all these different cool things. But, you know, where are you trying to go ultimately? Like what's the path here?
The ultimate goals have always been World's Strongest Man. I want World's Strongest Man, and there's no doubt in my mind that I have what it takes. In my mind, I know I'm going to win it someday.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of time and work and making sure that I keep learning and keep evolving from all the lessons and the experiences that I have accumulated over the years. And, you know, looking back on last year was the first year where I had essentially a full year of pro level contest experience. 2020 was my pro debut.
But that was a weird
year. It was a very weird year, very short year for contests. But 2021, I was in it, man. I was in it. And, you know, even in the midst of all these pro shows, I was dealing with knee injuries that I was not at my top level of performance, but I was still giving it my all and taking as much away from it as I can, because I know that everything that I went through last year is only going to push that bar further for what comes this year and all the years ahead. I plan on doing this for a long time, as long as I can, as long as I can healthily. But the ultimate goal is World's Strongest Man. I want to have that title. That is a big goal that I set for myself, not just when I turned pro, but when I started doing strongman. It's a weird thing for a newbie to the sport to say that, but there was never a doubt in my mind that I have what it takes. From witnessing the way I was able to progress through the early stages of my own training, I knew that I have what it takes to get there. And everything I've done between now and then has just greater affirmed that notion. So World's Strongest Man is the ultimate goal. Another ultimate goal is a deadlift world record. That is, I have no doubt in my mind I have what it takes to do it. Yeah. I pulled 1,000 pounds at the deadlift world champs last year, and that was right in the peak of my knee injuries.
Yeah.
So to be able to know that I can do 1,000 with knee injuries,
yeah,
I know that I can get that world record. It's just, again, a matter of time and work and making sure that I have a very effective prep with no injuries or anything holding me back.
Yeah.
So as far as strongman goes, those are the two biggest goals, and I am going to give it damn well everything I can to achieve them.
No, that's awesome, man. I mean, I love hearing that. And, you know, there's a certain part of that that's mental, right? And so knowing in your head what you're capable of and where you're going, and kind of being able to see that path and you know, where you're going to end up, right? There's a lot of power in that. And it's neat to hear you say that. And you know, it's going to be exciting to watch, you know, along the way, man, like the journey and, you know, in a lot of ways, the debut of you competing as a pro, like you said, was kind of skewed because of 2020 and even 2021 a little bit, you know. So now, hopefully in 2022, there's some big things coming up. I know there is, and we've been able to train together, you know, with you coming out yesterday, which was a heck of a lot of fun, and just the approach, man. I like learning the approach, and it's fascinating to learn, for me, your history, if you will, of how you got into things. And everybody's a little bit unique. Everybody's a little bit different in the way that they approach training and they approach competition. And, you know, through all their experiences, what they've learned and what they've taken away and what they've been able to apply from that learning and from those experiences. And, you know, I think you're a guy that's done a great job with having these experiences and, you know, going through the process and then coming back and getting better and improving, right? And improving on these weaknesses. And, you know, you've had injuries you've had to overcome, and you've had obstacles you've had to overcome. And it's neat to see you work through all that, man. And at the heart of it, still have that positive message and being grateful for, hey, yeah, this was tough, but I'm thankful and grateful for going through it because it taught me this. And now you're able to share that. And like I said, you're getting to coach a lot of people. And I feel like that's very rewarding for you. I think it's something that you really enjoy. And it seems like you've kind of done the training, the personal training early on, and now you've been able to apply it to coaching other people. And I'm sure their success makes you very happy too.
Let me tell you, Brian, it's one of the most profound joys in life to see one's own personal philosophies take shape in another person and watch them grow from it too. Like it's just so fulfilling to see and witness that happen firsthand. And I feel very fortunate to be able to work with such skilled and driven athletes across the nation. You know, it's been really fun to be a coach and to see those things take shape in their strengths and their skill. and I love it, man. But it's it's all too fitting that we're here in the mountains now, because I've learned a lot of my core life philosophies up here in the mountains. We were driving out this morning looking at the Continental Divide, and I pointed out Long's Peak, the northernmost 14er here in Colorado, there in Rocky Mountain National Park. And that was back in 2018 when my wife and I got married. I told you that peak was overlooking the frozen lake we stood on top of and said our vows.
That's really
cool.
And
I saw it. We both saw it, and we're like, I want to come back and climb that thing. Like, that is the biggest mountain I see in any direction I look. I want to come back and do it. And, we really invested ourselves into that process. We were listening to podcasts from Rocky Mountain National Park, like doing research on the route. Like, I had told you, when we actually climbed that mountain in August, 3 months after we got married, we started at 1:30 in the morning, and we did not make it to the summit of Long's Peak until about 11:30 a.m., so almost at noon. So, we're talking about nine hours of upward climb, and we didn't get back down to the cars until 5:30 p.m. So that's 15, 16-hour days of just climbing the mountains. But that really instilled a lot of the philosophies I have in terms of, the idea of the ultimate goal is beautiful on its own. Standing on top of that summit is amazing. You're looking out and getting that view from above is amazing. But it's every step that you take between that trailhead and there, all the obstacles, all the twists, all the turns, the rocks you have to climb over, the paths you have to take, the trees, the forest, the alpine. The beauty is in the journey itself and every obstacle along the way. And it's hard. There's times where I cramped up on that mountain, and I was on the side of a slope looking 4,000 feet down, stretching, trying to get these cramps to go away. But being able to overcome, the cramps, the altitude sickness, all of that, and get the job done. It was a hard day. And even, I told you before, like the deadlifts that I've done, all the things that I've achieved in Strongman so far have been great, and they've been epic. But that, to this day, summiting Long's Peak as my first 14er and learning the lessons I did on that long 16-hour day, I've taken so much of that and applied it to my life. I know what real hard is. Whenever I'm faced with something that seems difficult, I think of that mountain or any of the other mountains I've done since, and knowing that if I keep taking that step forward after the next step and keep moving, it's only a matter of time and work, like I've said over and over again. And these lessons that I've learned up here in the mountains, or lessons that I've learned through the hardships that I faced in owning a business, it's things that well equip me for everything that is yet to come. And I don't think enough people get to say that they've earned philosophies like that, which is tragic in a way, because it's one of the best tools in your arsenal, understanding that those positive steps forward just accumulate over and over, and sooner or later they're going to yield a quite magnificent view from above.
Yeah, that perspective is amazing, man. And talking to you about that climb and what you learned from that climb and where you had to go internally through moments of that climb when, you're a big guy doing this, right? You're not small, and it's not very easy, right? So there's, a part you described to me on that climb where you're doing basically a bear crawl for 3/4 of a mile straight, and your body's cramping up, and I'm sure your mind is like, wow, I don't know if I can do this, or, am I going to work through this? Am I going to get there? And, to overcome those type of challenges that are in front of you, obstacles that are in front of you, there is a lot of power in going to that spot mentally and working through those very difficult moments. And it's interesting to hear you say that's your biggest accomplishment. And when things seem hard, you compare it to that and say, I was able to do that. I was able to overcome that. And there's a certain amount of not physical strength, but mental strength that comes from going through very, very difficult things like that. And it's, like you said, you earn that perspective by going through that.
You come out of it a different and more well-equipped person, whether it's new philosophies, new strengths, new understanding, new perspective. It's quite an enlightening growth experience. It really is. And those experiences are core memories, and you don't lose them through any trial that you face from here on out. And, talking about it through mine, this has been a interview on Gabe the whole time. I'm curious to know, are there any experiences like that for you that you can think of? I would want to know what has led to 4 times World's Strongest Man being here, and what does he consider to be like the big mountains he's climbed over.
Gosh, that's a whole nother podcast probably. I mean, there's been a lot, man. There's been a lot, and those experiences for me have also taught me a lot. And there's been a lot of ups and downs and things that I've had to go through, personally and with competition, and it's created my own path as well, right? And my perspective and things that I've had to overcome. And some I have talked about and some I have not talked about. And, I definitely will talk about more on this podcast and in different ways, because I think it's important to share that type of stuff with people.
Well, and everyone has their own unique story too. And that's what's so great is all the different perspectives and flavors of this. So I would definitely be keen to listen to that podcast when it comes out.
No, for sure, man. I mean, I think there's so much power in ending with that story, of doing that climb, getting that perspective and learning so much about yourself and that self-growth, right? Yeah. And you're continuing that. And I know that we touched on earlier, you're going to be a dad soon.
Yeah.
Literally within the next month, you're going to be a dad. And that's going to give you a whole new perspective on life as well. And it's probably something we'll have to talk about, after it happens. I'm very curious to see what your thoughts are about it and what you can share with people. And going into that, I even said to you, I don't really want to tell you too much about what I thought or how it goes, but it just gives you such a different way to look at life. And it's beautiful, man. And I'm just so excited for your wife and you to experience that and go through it. And it's going to be amazing, man. And on the upside as well, now you are going to get dad strength.
Oh yeah.
Which is a level. I mean, it's a level up, man. It's coming.
Man, you're going to see that 1,000 pound jump straight up to 1105 real quick.
I can't wait, man. Well, tell everybody where they can follow you, where they can find you. If they want to check out Gabe Pena and learn more, man, where can they go?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm most active on Instagram. You can find me at Texas Titan Gabe on there. I would like to get a YouTube channel up, and I have a YouTube channel. I just haven't put much up on there yet, but I definitely love connecting with my fans, and even some of the things we've talked about here, getting to hear the outreach of people reach out to me and learn from my experience and relate to them.
Yeah.
Even just being at 2020 World's Strongest Man, that made me the first Hispanic Latino in history to compete at that platform. And the amount of outpour from Latinos worldwide, just to see a Latin American or a Latin country, represented at that stage, that has been so incredible. For me, it was as simple of a decision as representing my heritage and, a lot of the culture from the area of South Texas where I grew up from.
Yeah.
But then to hear that level of connection and pride from people that I've never met, that I might never meet. Just to see it's amazing, man.
And that's like a whole other thing we talked about that we were going to talk about here. I feel like we've had such a cool conversation, but that inspiration to those people and it's amazing, man, the reach. And I see where you're going and the message that you're putting out, and I am excited to see where you're going to go, with this, and you're going to continue to inspire those people and to pave that path for them. And who knows, maybe we'll see more of them, follow in your footsteps and go into strength and show off their strength, right?
Well, that's one of the things that's excited me most about, when they told me that I was the first Latino in the first Hispanic Latino in history to be at that stage. That was cool. But what sounds even cooler, in my opinion, is the first of many. That sounds way cooler. And so I hope that, I've come to learn that I have inspired people, and that I will take that with me all throughout the rest of my life as being an immense source of pride.
I love it, man. I love it. Well, keep inspiring people. I really appreciate you coming on, man, and sharing your story. And I feel like you're a guy that I could literally talk to all day about this stuff, and we could dive into this and dive into that. And
that just means we got to do more in the future.
I think we do, man. I think we do. But definitely appreciate your time, man. Of course, I wish you all of the best for the future with the baby, with your family, with the competition, and just want to see you succeed, man. So it's going to be really awesome. If you guys enjoyed this podcast, if you got something out of it, if it made you think in a different way, please share it. We're trying to get this thing going, and Gabe is just one of many awesome guests that I hope to have on here and to dive into, right? Like have a good conversation like we just did. So, please share it and help us grow this thing and make it awesome. But really appreciate your time, brother. And I think we are going to sign off right there.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Lots of love to you all. Thank you.